What's up, YouTubers and plant lovers? It's Justin, and today I wanted to show you how I care for my Tsiku Marguerite Oncidium. Now, that is a little bit of a tongue twister, but this is an Oncidium orchid, and it is a great orchid to have. Not only are they known to be profuse, prolific bloomers, but they have a great smell to them too. This one actually smells like baby powder, and it's, like I said, it's got profuse flowers that come up in inflorescence that actually come out of each pseudobulb. And they have little kind of small diminutive looking flowers that come in a white and yellow kind of color for the flowers, or they can be a pale pink and have an orangish center, but like I said, mine kind of reminds me of a daffodil with the white sprayish kind of floral brackets or whatever you want to call them, and then the yellow centers. But I have seen them in a pale pink too. But they are really easy orchids to take care of, especially if you're a beginner to the world of orchids and you like the Oncidiums. They really are typically okay orchids to take care of, but this one right here is really easy to take care of, and for a couple of good reasons. So I'll go into that too, a little bit of detail. But I did want to tell you that Oncidiums typically hail from around Central and South America. And with the species count, I believe there's around about 330. And if you kind of fathom how many orchids there are out there in the world, that's a really small percentage of the orchid population, with only about 330 different species out there. So this one is a hybrid, and around the year 2000, a orchid grower cultivated a cross between an Oncidium Twinkle and an Oncidium sotuanum. And then we got the Tsiku Marguerite. Now, I've heard people call it the dancing lady, and they call it that just because it looks really kind of fragile and eccentric and kind of elegant with its flowers and its leaves. But don't let that fool you. This is a workhorse when you talk about an orchid. These guys are relatively fast growers. They usually reach maturity at around about 12 months, a year. Some can take a little bit longer, some can probably go a little bit faster, though not much. And they get to a height of about 12 inches, and that usually takes around about a year. But like I said, they're pretty fast growing orchids because they can do that in about a year's time. But they are evergreens, and I love the color on these leaves. If you look at them with all these lights that I have right here, it almost looks like an ombre effect, with the bottom of the leaves kind of being a light yellowish kind of pretty green, and the top parts of the leaves being a darker kind of jade green. And they look really spectacular, especially with the pseudobulbs that give way to these flowers and these inflorescence and these leaves. I mean, they really are a show-stopping orchid, especially with mine. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 inflorescence coming up in the middle of winter. Now, I tell you that just to let you know that these do hail from around Central and South America, as I stated earlier. So you really want to take that into consideration whenever you're deciding where to place this orchid. They typically get a decent amount of sunlight, a decent amount of humidity, again, a decent amount of water, and kind of moderate to higher temperatures around the equator and the areas in the tropics and subtropics. So you really kind of want to emulate that in your home. So I'll go over a few key points that I try to focus on to keep this orchid so happy and so healthy. And first, when you talk about any kind of care with the plant, you really want to kind of talk about the light. And with this guy, Oncidiums typically like a decent amount of light. This guy can adjust accordingly. They're fairly forgivable with the amounts of lights, but they do typically like it to be a little bit more on the moderate amount end. Typically you would think of orchids like Phalaenopsis. They don't need a crap ton of light. They need some LEDs that don't emit too much heat, and they're pretty okay. But this is kind of on par with a Cattleya. So they do need maybe around 2,000 to 3,000 foot candles when you're talking about how much light they need. So it's a moderate amount, and for the most part, When this guy is not in bloom, I have him under my higher sourced LEDs, like my spider farmers, and they put out a decent amount of light, and he's happy with that. As of now, while he's flowering, I've got one of these little LED full spectrum ring grow lights that I got off Amazon. It's got the telescoping adjustable height. I think it cost me $14, and I got the 2-pack, and I think it was like $25, something like that. But this has done really well with him, and the reason I do that is because this doesn't put off a crap ton of light, although it does have this little adjustment thing down here, so I can raise it up and lower it as needed, and I can set a timer on there too. But with these smaller flowers, if I were to set that underneath the spider farmers, they would go out in a day or two and just suck all the moisture out of them and leave them looking rather unsightly, and I'd have to remove all those flowers. But that light that I have him under now, while he's flowering, does the job just fine and keeps him pretty happy. But through the growing seasons, I don't like to give him that little bit of amount of light. That should be okay, but it doesn't reach all the leaves like I would like it to. So I do supplement the growing season with some morning light that comes through in the my east facing window, and he's fine with that. And ideally that's what you want to do with these orchids, is give them ample morning soft light that's not too high intensity with temperatures and all that, and then I supplement him throughout the rest of the day with some LED grow lights, full spectrum, that keep him in check. But like I said, they are adjustable to certain amounts of light. That is one thing that they can adjust on. But if you want them to flower and flower profusely, then you should probably consider increasing the amount of light that your orchid is receiving. Now, when discussing water, water is another thing that they can be fairly tolerant to. They can take lower amounts or they can take higher amounts, and kind of anything in between. And that's really why this orchid is great for beginners. They're not susceptible to too many diseases, including root rot. So you can water this guy a little bit more normal than you would probably other orchids, and he'd be fine. But just remember, during the growing seasons, you need to give them a little bit more water, and then in the colder seasons and the dormant seasons, you should cut that back. Now he's flowering right now, so I'm going to continue to water him as normal because he is growing and he's getting his ample light from the LEDs, and the temperature is fine in my house, and he is flowering. So I want to go ahead and water him as normal so that he can keep these flowers open and smelling good and using all that energy to combat with all that water that he needs. Ideally, you want to use water that is maybe reverse osmosis water or distilled water. Now, rainwater is really good for these plants if you don't live near a really big city or near a really big city, because a lot of that rainwater is typically a little bit dirtier. Tap water is okay, but if you have a lot of chemicals and additives added to it to soften the water, or you have really hard water like we do here in Kentucky, or you have a really high pH, anything at 7.5 or lower is ideal with tap water, but it is kind of scary, and it's kind of a roulette on whether or not he will adjust accordingly to your tap water. And as you can see, a couple of his tips were a little bit brown, so I have switched him fully to distilled water, and he seems to be fine with that too. Now you do need to cut back watering in the dormant cycle, so as soon as his flowering is done, I will kind of lower the temperatures a bit and cut back on his watering as well. Now some growers say that they don't water them at all when they go dormant, just because of the area that they come from. They don't need a whole lot of water, but I do water him some, but I do cut back almost drastically with his water intake. But again, you always want to make sure water goes through the entire orchid, goes down through the media, and comes out the bottom, ensuring that every root has met some water and stays happy and healthy and wet. If they get too dry and they go an extensive period without water, then they can actually start to die back, and then if left unchecked, the plant will start to die back too. Media, very important. They are epiphytic orchids, so they will produce aerial roots. So they do need to have something that's like, I use fir bark, some people use pine bark, I use some horticultural charcoal, and I use a little bit of perlite and some sphagnum moss in there as well. And that seems to be fine with him. They do need breathable media to help them actually with their roots and their growing habits. And they also need something that doesn't hold on to a crap ton of water, but you want them to hold on to a little bit because it's an orchid and they like their humidity and they like their water. So just keep that in mind too. Sphagnum moss usually holds water better than like pine barks, so if you have more pine bark in there and not a whole lot of sphagnum moss, you may be watering it more often than if you didn't. So I do have a little bit of sphagnum moss and some pine bark in there, and I water him probably right now once or twice a week, giving about 2 or 3 cups of water, enough to kind of circulate and out to the bottom. Temperatures are very important with this orchid too. They can tolerate a decent amount in the temperature range, but in the summertime it needs to be anywhere from 65 on up to about 80, and including nighttime temperatures. And then in the wintertime it needs to go down to about 59 on up to about 60 at night times, and air circulation for this orchid is very important. 2 things that the plant is not adjustable on or doesn't want to sacrifice at all is air circulation and humidity. This guy loves his humidity. So I keep the humidity in my house, more specifically in the room that he's located in. I've got him at about, I think, 44% humidity, but they really need humidity levels between 40 and 60%, and while in flowering they need to be on the higher levels to keep them happy and healthy. Like I said, they do get fussy with their humidity levels, so if you are below 40% or well above 60% for an extended period of time, you may have problems with your orchid, but in that range they are pretty happy and healthy and tolerable with it. So you will need to invest in an oscillating fan and a hydrometer. Now I know that does sound a little bit intimidating and it does sound a little expensive, but I have an alarm clock in my bedroom that actually monitors the humidity level in my room and tells me that too. And you can go to Lowe's or Home Depot and get a hydrometer that tells you the temperature and the humidity of that room for fairly cheap, for around $10 to $13. And humidifiers, they range accordingly on how much and how expensive you want to actually drop your money with it, but they're not that expensive. I think for around 30, 40 bucks you can get a decent humidifier. I stay away from the ones with filters in them, but you do have to clean them once a week with some distilled white vinegar. You're good. It's not hard at all. And another little interesting fact about this guy is it's an orchid, so there are no toxic orchids out there. It doesn't bother your birds, doesn't bother your pets, any horses, livestock, or anything of that nature, and it doesn't bother any kids either. Now ideally you don't want to go around and just chomping on them or chopping them up and throwing them in salads or anything like that, but there aren't really any toxic orchids out there that I know of that would actually kill or hurt anybody. And this guy is no exception. So it is a safe plant to keep in your home. If you've got little ones running around or any fur babies, you're fine. I did say that they are an extensively growing fast plant, and you can actually tell that he is in a 4-inch pot and he has got some ample root growth coming out the bottom and the tops with these little wiry looking roots that are sticking out. So come spring I'll probably go ahead and repot him. Like I said, they are somewhat fast growing orchids, so that is one thing that you may have to regularly monitor, is how full they are in their pots, because they are somewhat of a fast growing orchid. Another interesting fact about this guy is that they are a hybrid orchid, so they actually were bred for specific reasons, and one reason is that they don't have any problems with any diseases, and they really don't have a problem with too many pests either. Now I'm not saying that they won't have any diseases or that they won't have any problems with any pests at all, but typically they don't have problems in either department. Occasionally you may see a problem with scale or aphids or mealybugs, but if you look him over all the time and having some place that you can actually keep a close eye on him and just look him over once a day, it's easy to catch anything that might be able to develop into a whole flock of problems later on down the road. So just kind of look him over every once in a while and make sure you don't see any filaments, any kind of chomp marks on the leaves, anything that may indicate a infestation is around the corner. So you just kind of want to look over and make sure you don't see any filaments or any kind of bugs on any part of the leaf, top or bottom, because a lot of those insects like to hide out where they can't be seen, which is typically underneath the leaves, and with some bugs they can actually go down and harm the roots. So if you have an infestation, you need to not only worry about the top part of the plant, but the bottom part too, where they'll be in there kind of feasting on some roots, like your mealybugs and stuff like that. Alright guys, well that's really all I wanted to say on this plant. Like I said, it's a great orchid to actually have, especially if you're a beginner to the orchid world. You don't have to invest too much time with these orchids. You don't have to water them that often. You don't have to feed them that often. Now I'm not saying don't water them and don't feed them, but you don't have to do it as prolifically as you would with other orchids, say your vandas or your cattleyas or your dendrobiums or anything of that nature. But like I said, they are considered a workhorse, so they actually do flower a decent amount. And man, those fresh blooms, they smell really good. They smell like baby powder, and I wish you could smell these. And the flowers actually do last from about 4 to 6 weeks, so they'll actually come on there and look pretty good, and then they'll flower throughout the year. But anytime that they do flower, they open up and they just smell wonderful. So if you've never had an Oncidium, or you're looking for just an easy orchid to care for, please consider getting one of these orchids, because they are just easy to take care of and they really are showstoppers and beautiful orchids. Alright, and as always, I want to give a shout out to my patrons. I want to give another special shout out to my top tier tree patrons like Thuyen N. Thank you for everything. I'd like to give another shout out to David and Heather as well. If you are interested in supporting my channel through Patreon, the link is in the description box below. As always, any kind of money goes to helping me keeping all these lights on, fresh water and food, new pots. It's all expensive, and any help is greatly appreciated. Alright guys, well this has been Justin reminding you that if you can, go out and plant a tree. Let's reforest the world. And while you're at it, don't forget to leave me a comment and let me know what your favorite type of orchid is. I have a whole bunch, but I love my Oncidiums and my Phalaenopsis and Vandas. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button or the bell next to it. That way you know anytime that I've uploaded a new video. You guys take it easy, have a good one, and don't forget, always plant prudently. Thank you, YouTube.